Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ann Wilson. I'm an artist and professor emeritus in fiber and material studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. It's my great privilege tonight to introduce the program entitled Threads of Care, Preserving and Interpreting Textiles from Africa and Southwest Asia. We join Textiles curator Janet Purdy and conservator Isaac Facio as they share the stories behind a selection of textiles from Africa and Southwest Asia and the particular ways they care for them. Two exhibitions will be referenced. The first, On Loss and Absence, Textiles of Mourning and Survival, is currently in the museum's Textile galleries through March 15th and is guest curated by Isaac Facio and Nikikayi L. Weinbaum and me. Along our multi-year research path for this exhibition, we sincerely thank curator Janet Purdy, who shared her wisdom and scholarship. Janet is curating the next exhibition in the museum's textile galleries, entitled Embroidered Traditions from Morocco to Afghanistan, opening May 2nd. This new exhibition is the first devoted exclusively to the artistic and cultural traditions of Swana, Southwest Asia, Northern Africa, and will showcase this region's distinctive visual expressions in dress and adornment. Janet Marion Purdy is Associate Curator in Textiles at the Art Institute of Chicago and a visiting lecturer in art history at the University of Chicago. Her multi-sited global research examines Afro-Arab Asian visual relationships in textiles, metalwork, and architecture as artistic and cultural exchange across Africa, Southwest and Central Asia, and the Indian Ocean world. She received her PhD in Historical Arts and Architecture of Africa from Penn State University and was a Fulbright Scholar in Zanzibar, Tanzania in 2018-19. Purdy serves as a research and curatorial consultant for Qatar museums in Doha, including support for the Qatar National Pavilion in Venice Biennial Architectura 2025. Isaac Facio focuses on the care, preservation, display, and study of textiles as a conservator within the Art Institute's Conservation and Science Department. In conjunction with his museum work, he's also a senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute, where he works with students on the close looking and hands-on study of objects. Isaac completed an MFA from the School of the Art Institute and an MS in Textile Technology, Engineering, and Physical Sciences from the University of Manchester in England. As we begin, a brief reminder to please silence your mobile devices. And now, please join me in welcoming Janet Purdy and Isaac Facio.
Thank you so much, Anne. We are so honored to have you here to introduce us so kindly this evening. And I also want to express what an honor it was for me to work with all four curators on the On Loss and Absence project over the last few years. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We're really grateful that you're sharing the time with us, and we're grateful for your support. Are you ready, Isaac?
I'm ready, Dr. Purdy.
I promise I don't ask him to call me that. Isaac, you know, after 6 years of working together, you can just call me Dr. Janet.
We heard it, so.
Or professor.
Professor.
Yeah. No, but speaking of professors and doctoral students and things like that, Isaac and I are both really invested in education, and we're interested in audience engagement and participation. So we want this to be informative tonight, but also a unique way to talk about what we're talking about tonight. So eventually we will explain why we are sitting underneath this unusual contraption on the stage. But this is really a special opportunity to show a live demonstration of some of the investigative work that we do together in the Textiles Conservation Lab. And we'll share more about that in just a little bit. And we will do our very best to not talk too much and save a lot of time at the end for you to contribute to the conversation and to ask questions. And I also just have to mention, you like us to be framed, right?
But this is why we're doing this. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't mind telling you, it's part of Isaac's contract that wherever he goes on a stage, he has to be framed like this. And also,
that should be more censored. Yeah.
backstage there is always has to be what, V8 and white M&Ms.
White M&Ms?
I don't know. It's your contract.
I've never heard of those, but
Okay.
Well, thanks, Janet. We are very excited to have this conversation here this evening with all of you because it gives us an opportunity to show you how much of our work is really overlapping on the things that we do here on an everyday basis, especially on the topics of displaying, carrying, of textiles, especially of the African continent and Southwest and Central Asia, parts of the world that Janet is very specialized in.
Dr. Janet.
Professor Dr. Janet, yes, sorry.
But okay, I'll stop making that joke.
So in other regions that have not been well represented and studying at the museum here and collections historically, so it's a really special thing that we get to talk about today. So.
Yes, and also we hope this discussion serves as a kind of bridge between the two exhibitions that Anne mentioned earlier, the two exhibitions that each of us have curated on loss and absence in the galleries now, as Anne said, through March 15th. How many of you, if you don't mind raising your hands, how many of you have already visited this phenomenal exhibition? Yes.
Oh, there's a lot of people.
Yes,
yeah.
Wonderful. And especially because Isaac is in this unique role of acting as one of the curators for that exhibition, while also he fully applied all of his extensive knowledge and experience as a conservator, both in that exhibition and then in the next exhibition, Embroidered Traditions from Morocco to Afghanistan. So we've been working on this together at the same time. And as you can see, this opens May 2nd, and it runs all the way through the end of January of 2027. So we'll look forward to welcoming you back to the galleries for that exhibition. And while the focus on that exhibition is different than on Loss and Absence, working with Isaac and the other curators over the last at least 3 years, I don't know, many years.
5 years, sure.
You guys have been working I've probably only worked 3 of those. No, I'm just kidding. But that's really helped to inform my own thinking and planning for this next presentation that we'll make in the galleries. There have been, as Isaac said earlier, a lot of overlaps. And quickly before we move forward with the program, I just want to put this next program on your radars. We hope to see you all back here in Fullerton Hall in just a few months, right after Embroidered Traditions opens on May 2nd. So please mark your calendars and join us here again. Isaac and I always say this is really a privilege for both of us to do the type of work that we do. And we feel it is our duty and our responsibility to share it with others, share our thought processes, these considerations around all the aspects of care for these textiles, no matter where in the world they come from. And we don't take these topics of preservation and interpretation and care lightly at all. And on this map, we've highlighted for you here as a reference the locations in Africa and Southwest Asia that represent the 5 locations or the 5 examples that we'll discuss this evening where the textiles were created and where they were used. And before we get into those, we just both want to give an overview of the 2 exhibitions from which we were drawing for this talk.
And as many of you have already gone to the exhibition, I'll keep it short, but I think it'll be good for me to just give a brief overview of what on Loss and Absence, Textiles, the Mourning and Survival was for us. we view textiles very much as a material we know most intimately, even when we are not consciously aware of it. They are the first thing that envelops us at birth. We are wrapped in cloth before we can even speak. We wear textiles against our skin every day of our lives. They hold our warmth, absorb our labor, and move with our bodies. And at the very end of life, textiles accompanying us again. In shrouds, garments, and coverings, cloth marks our entire human journey. This exhibition on Lost and Absent, Textiles of Mourning and Survival invites visitors to look closely at more than 100 objects from different cultures and time periods, organized around the themes of death and mourning, care and repair, transitions between realms, and resistance and survival. The exhibition shows how textiles help individuals and communities understand loss, cope with trauma, and sustain cultural knowledge. Curated by 4 artists affiliated with the Fiber and Material Studies at SAIC, including myself and Wilson, who you met before, and Elle Weinbaum, I think you're out there too. Raise your hand somewhere in the dark. The exhibition reflects makers' understanding of cloth. It honors textiles not only as objects, but as repositories of tactile knowledge and lived experience. Doing so, it recognizes the profound roles textiles play in our human, in how we remember, survive, and tell the stories of our world. Not just, yeah. Here's just some examples of the exhibition that I know many of you already recognize, with items that are on display specifically from North Africa and Southwest Asia.
And the exhibition Embroidered Traditions from Morocco to Afghanistan is in part an opportunity to honor a shift in our textiles department towards shaping a more inclusive and diverse collection, including research, collaborations, and displays that celebrate our global world and the vast array of cultures and artistic traditions that are represented. As Anne said, it is the first exhibition in the history of the Art Institute to focus on textiles, dress, and adornment from the Swana region, where embroidery and embellishments are really more than surface decoration. They carry meanings and memories in many ways that words cannot. Swana, Southwest Asia, North Africa, it's a region, it's a term that people use. There are really no specific borders. It's kind of malleable, especially to the people who live in this region. They claim different areas of ownership. But I wanted to show this map just to give you an idea of the area that's covered. And all of the objects that will be on display come from this kind of light orange overlay region. There are going to be 75 works in the exhibition, 67 of which are drawn from the Art Institute's collection, and the majority of them have never been on view before. The exhibition is organized thematically, not geographically or over time, and the artworks that will be shown together through these themes are based in nomadic traditions and trade, also urban fashions, and basically just the idea is to show the movements of people and ideas, how they've gone across that region that I just showed you, and how that region has people and the ideas have long been conduits of cultural, intellectual, artistic, religious exchange that's reflected in this material culture. And at the same time, we're working very hard to make sure we don't flatten the region into one story, because there are many, many, many stories. And we want to instead highlight the differences and the identity and the innovations in all of these different textiles. So on the left, you see this gargouche headdress from Yemen, which is in one of the first 2 galleries, which focus on identity, innovation, and different techniques across the region. And on the right is an example of the gallery that is dedicated to bath culture, hammams, which are ubiquitous across this region. Privacy and protection is the next theme, and there's a subtext in that section about wearable wealth. So we address the fact that cultural groups throughout the region wear layers and layers of dress and adornment to protect their bodies physically and spiritually. Garments and household items are ornamented with valuable materials that function as wearable wealth, including symbolic motifs and designs constructed with coins, thread, beads, amulets, ornaments, jewelry, coral, copal, as you see here. And this is an example of that kind of layering in the privacy and protection section, it becomes clear that jewelry, ornament, embroidery, and all other forms of embellishment are inextricable elements of dress and adornment. And then the last section is ceremony and celebration. And here, especially with these gentlemen from the Wodabi culture, or the Bororo culture of Niger, I've extended the borders of what is considered Swana to lean into this idea of exchange between nomadic cultural groups like the Wodabi men, who are heavily connected through trade to other nomadic groups in the region, such as the Tuareg people, who are represented in this kind of leather wallet that you see all of the men wearing as well as part of their ceremonial dress for this festival. And as also the Amazigh people, formerly called the Berbers, you might know them that way. All of these groups connect with and extend to urban communities all the way up to northern Morocco, so from Niger all the way up to northern Morocco, and then across North Africa to eastern Libya and western Egypt. And finally, this ceremonial man's abaya illustrates one of our main goals, which is to exhibit works that epitomize traditions and visual vocabularies that are very well known in the region, but may be unfamiliar or even unknown to most of us here and our museum visitors here in Chicago. So another goal is thus for members of these communities who are from these regions or who have families and histories there to see themselves represented in the museum in a way they have not seen before. And I've been focusing on this Jato ceremonial dress as a central image for the exhibition because it represents celebratory moments and cultural traditions, but it also symbolizes the extension of kind of the gray areas of the borders that are often applied to spaces that are truly interconnected and have been for thousands of years. And also just there are so many beautiful layers and attachments to this, that the stories that we can tell and the artistry and the intangible links to the past. So we'll move now to a few of the examples that we would like to talk through related to this focus of our program, considerations of display and interpreting textiles from Africa and Southwest Asia, and the ideas that are important for long-term care, preservation, and ethical and responsible knowledge applications that we share in their display as an institution. And we'll begin with a few of the African textiles that are on display in the galleries now. You may recognize them, I hope. These three specific cases. We'll start first with these Kuba wrappers. These wrappers, they're right at the entrance to the exhibition. They're made by both men and women of the many subculture groups that fall under an overarching umbrella called the Kuba Kingdom, which is located in the Kasai province of what is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you may be familiar with these designs, as Kuba patterns are some of the best known motifs and designs from across the entire continent of Africa. And they're typically displayed, as you see, in this upper level flat, as in this example at the top, so that you can see the design and the rhythm and the movement. And this is what Kuba textiles are quite often known for. In Kuba traditions, when they're actually used, they're wrapped around and around bodies. So they'll be wrapped around bodies in dance or ceremonies, as you see here on the left, but they're also wrapped around a deceased person, layers and layers of them, as many layers as a family can afford before the person goes into the grave. And that's the context that the curators wanted to show in this exhibition for On Loss and Absence. What's the focus of that first gallery?
This is Death and Mourning.
Death and Mourning.
Death and Mourning, yeah.
I think that's you, right? Are you next?
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so like Janet said, the way that the Kuba textile on the top is displayed is a very typical way that we display textiles here. It's an ethafoam pin mount, so the entire thing is fully laid out open so that you're able to see the textile in all its design and scale, really. But the installation on the bottom was a bit more of an experimental endeavor for us. It's not something that we have typically done here in these galleries, but we definitely wanted to show something, a little bit more of an interpretation of how these would have been used. Janet explained how these would be wrapped around a body during celebrations, etc., but also during a funerary practice. And that aspect of seeing the layering of pattern upon pattern, texture upon texture, especially these beautiful appliques and velvet pile was an important aspect that we wanted to emulate. And we did it very simply here just by putting it over a padded support structure off the wall to emulate it, the human scale, but not necessarily so literal, but just to have that aspect of layering and that very richness, visual richness of the layered surface.
And I just want to say, I want to give big credit to the curatorial team, especially Anne, whose idea, I don't know where she went, and who, I think this was your idea to try this suggestion rather than to literally show a form, a body.
Real body.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think this is a great innovation.
Yeah.
And this, in this first gallery, in association with this, whether or not to show contextual illustrations became a related point of discussion and debate. And this example, here we go. So we've got an example here that shows how in these cultural traditions, textiles line the inside of the grave and then the deceased person is wrapped and then placed inside it. Sometimes they're piled up so much that they can barely put the person into the grave, and that's a big sign of status. And we actually have an image that shows a body, a deceased person wrapped in textiles. But we decided that the suggestion of the idea was enough and more respectful, especially with the addition of this wonderful illustration.
Yeah. Well, similarly with this patulu that you see here, is part of a tradition also of layering a deceased individual with mounds of textile, with these specifically on the top of a mound. And it was a similar discussion to how we would interpret this. We certainly had images. We can go to the next slide to show the image of that you see here, also interpreted by drawing. We opted to go this route of showing these illustrations done by Atlas Arkan, a student at SAIC, based on photography by artist Katarina Wesleyan, who had visited and gotten permission to actually document all these rituals from these people back in the mid-'80s, I believe, and in 1984, I believe, if that's correct. But it seemed a layer of being too voyeuristic to actually show the mourner in photography and in something that would be so intimate, which was very much contrary to my initial belief, because I actually wanted to show, my initial thought was to show a lot of images of faces and tears and people in mourning, but I think it was the right decision to make to do it in this way, because it is, after all, the textile that we want people to connect with. And we have so much experience with that in our own life that I think that this illustration alone documents that for us.
And we even Isaac and I talked about, should we show the images to you tonight? And we decided we'll just talk about them.
I think it's the rightest. I think we're going to stick to our decision.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a quick break, but we do have to go faster.
Okay.
But I to ask all of you, make sure you're awake. So those of you that have visited this exhibition, did you look at these labels here? Can you raise your hand if you actually looked at these labels? That's fantastic. That's good news. It takes a lot of work to write those labels, so we're glad that you look at them. So those of you that looked at the labels, could you raise your hand if you agree with our decision to not use photographs? Interesting. Okay, thank you. We appreciate your feedback. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we're already talking too much. So the next example is this talismanic tunic, which you see on the left, and it's a private garment. It's commissioned by a person that wants spiritual and physical protection, and it's worn, it's usually secret. It's worn under something like you would see here on the right, this bubu tilbi. And it's linked to a lot of prayerful traditions in the region and religious texts, and it's got a really interesting process of how it's made. I'm going to say it very quickly. So a person will go to an imam, a religious specialist, and request one of these. The imam will write prayers on a Quran board like you see like this. It gets washed off with water into a bowl mixed with other materials and then painted onto the base cloth of the textile. And then another religious specialist writes with ink on top of it again. So it's many layers of protection. And again, one of these discussions about is something that's this private and this personal and hidden from view, was it right, A, to acquire it, and B, to show it in the galleries in front of everyone like it is? And where we ended up landing with some research with some colleagues in Mali and also in Nigeria, we found out that this talismanic tunic that we acquired is actually one of a group that was produced together, kind of like an assembly line for the market. So it wasn't commissioned for a very specific person. It was made to be sold in a market, and then you could customize it. And so for people that either don't have access to the funds to do it on their own, but it was less of a private garment and more of a market garment. So I think that let us feel better about showing it. And it's in the same context as what you see from this picture at the Topkapi Palace. That's a tradition that's been happening in Turkey since you see the 16th century, where they do the same thing. They make a bunch of garments with a pattern and leave empty spaces that are kind of customized. So it's almost like printing your own postcards. So we did, like I said, we did land on, we felt like it was okay to show it in the galleries. But again, we'll be interested in other people's thoughts.
So in this gallery that we're looking at now falls under the subtheme of care and repair, and within it, the room focuses on care, comfort, and objects of care, comfort, and protection. At the center is an object that captured our attention very early on in the 5-year research process behind the scenes in storage. We were given an extraordinary access to the textile collection, working closely with our extended curators over many years. That sustained time with the collection was a privilege. It allowed us to look slowly and really connect with the items that were in this collection, because after all, the story that we wanted to tell was based here in this holding. This tunic was one of the first objects that held us. It's an archaeological fragment from a burial, identified as a child's tunic. Its fragmentation drew us, but it was the association with the child that stayed with us. Through conservation study and collaboration with curators, we came to understand its scale. The dimensions suggest that it belonged to a very small child, likely an infant, not much larger than the garment itself. As a conservator, here I am with Anika Kai, another co-curator of the project, who is in upstate New York now. But I get to spend a lot of time and lots of time in storage and also on my bench studying objects, learning their histories through the wear, stitching, stains, and structure. The more we look at this tunic, the more it revealed to us. Its decoration, the tapestry woven details became clear. Its creases, its mark invited contemplation. While we know we cannot reconstruct the life behind it, that sustained, careful looking inspired us to create a space for others to slow down as well. The exhibition is about shared human experience through loss and absence expressed through material culture. Around the tunic, we placed objects in care and healing, including contemporary response by Karen Hampton titled Ancestors Cry. I think that's the next slide over. Oh, nope. Maybe go back 2 more slides, yeah. And soft music in the gallery also is in the space. In the gallery, in the space creates a space of reflection. The chant has a long been central morning ritual, offering structure for prayer and remembrance, and a Coptic Orthodox hymns, including Kyrie eleison, meaning Lord have mercy, play quietly in the background, also to invite us to slow down and just think, by the evidence left behind on this object, to think more and deeply about it.
And now we're shifting to the work that we're doing for the next exhibition and the longer-term research associated with it, which means we're almost ready for the bells and whistles portion of the program that Isaac has all set up and ready to go here. And I will talk just briefly to keep us on time, about this coin fringe, which you can see in the image of this bride or this woman from Ramallah, Palestine. It goes right here. It's attached to a headdress that goes underneath the woman's veil. And it's associated with a girl becoming a woman, someone getting married, but she's carrying, I mentioned earlier, I talked about this privacy and protection and wearable wealth. She's wearing the wealth of her family. And this one is really interesting because, as you can see, when we purchased it, it looked like this. And then it came in and some of the coins have come off. But by our close looking and learning about this, we've learned that probably, I'm gonna go back, the family would have attached the coins, whatever money they had, right here, what's visible, and then later they added a second set of coins on either side as they gained wealth or as she got older, we don't know. But this is just a great opportunity. I'm gonna let you take over.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the coins also span a period of 150 years, which we thought was quite interesting. But you could see here that the object arrived with 18 out of the 72 coins that are attached in the front that were broken off. It's a plain weave cotton band embroidered with silk and cross stitching. You could see a lot of that detail in the center image, and the side is the cotton lining as well that is printed and etched with metal coins attached using a plant fiber floss, most likely a cotton. But the coins show tarnishing, varied green copper corrosion, and localized red waxy and resin-like residues at the attachment points, which we found really curious. This focus project will be collaborative. The textile conservation portion will stabilize the structure, while the talented Lisa Ackerman, who we see over there, Lisa, is in objects conservation, will oversee the metal components. We will also work with your extraordinary, knowledgeable, and super geeky Liz Bench, who is somewhere in the audience also, who is our in-house
I can't say it. Numismatist?
Numismatist.
She studies coins.
Coin specialist. And colleagues from our conservation science team will conduct targeted analysis before treatment. Key questions include identifying the red residue, characterizing the different corrosion products, and determine the coin alloy composition to assess mixed metal risks. And okay, so there's a lot of work to be done with our team that you see on the right here as well. And the analysis will be guided to inform careful conservation decisions, just really the approach that we will take to clean and put this back together while we get to study more aspects of it.
And now to our last object, which is actually right here. This is a face veil made by the Lakai peoples. It's a cultural group who lived in mostly remote parts of what is today Uzbekistan. And this will be displayed in the privacy and protection section of my exhibition. But as you can imagine, there are different questions about preservation, interpretation for a work like this that we just don't know a lot about. These are out of fashion, they're not made anymore. And so this is the moment where, and I put this image on the right just so you can see how sheer it is, because it's not easy to tell, and we won't actually be able to hold it up here on the stage. But this is brand new to our collection, and we're still working on knowledge about the production and what we can learn from the analysis of the structure. And this is the part about why Isaac is so interested in materials testing and why we are here tonight with this fancy arrangement. So today is really a rare and special opportunity. We're bringing a recent acquisition onto the stage so that we can spend time looking at it closely together with you. And this is unusual. Objects in museum collections are typically experienced in carefully controlled gallery or storage environments, not in open public spaces where someone can just walk across the stage. And when an artwork enters a museum, it enters a new realm of care. Its purpose shifts toward long-term preservation so that it can carry stories forward for generations. In the galleries, you see raised platforms, vitrines, and barriers. What you do not always see are the tightly regulated environmental systems behind them: stable temperature, humidity, controlled lighting, filtration, and in some cases, even microclimates inside the cases. These measures are not meant to limit access, but to protect the object so that access remains possible over time. And for this presentation, we took extensive precautions to make this is the legal portion of the, just kidding. We took extensive precautions to make this experience possible without compromising the object. We first verified that the stage environment met acceptable standards for temperature, humidity, and cleanliness. We ensured that the surface and surrounding areas were prepared and stable. The presentation was reviewed and approved by the heads of the Conservation Department, Conservation Science, and Security. And transportation of the object to reach the stage was carefully managed. Our wonderful department technician, Esther Espino, oversaw the movement of the object from storage to the stage and will supervise its safe return when we release you. The object arrived in its custom storage box and will remain supported and protected throughout this presentation. And we intentionally selected a small object so that it could be viewed in detail using an overhead camera and microscope. This allows us to examine it together without handling it directly. The object will remain flat and supported at all times, and no one will come onto the stage, and we ask that you help us to maintain the protective zone. What makes this special is precisely the distinction between spaces. Storage vaults and galleries are designed as controlled, stable environments deemed safe for artworks. The stage is not normally one of those spaces. So today, through careful preparation and collaboration, we have temporarily transformed it into one so that you can share this close-looking experience, and we can do it responsibly. Take it away, Isaac.
Great. So we're going to be looking at really closely under magnification at some of the details of this really interesting object, and Janet will tell us more about it as we go. But I wanted to take just a few seconds to just kind of ground you on this, because we're going to see some things that are not typical. And as I mentioned several times already, we're all very familiar with textiles. Just like in your own clothing, a very basic cloth that you are all wearing is a woven cloth, as you see here. If you can go to the next slide, you can textilians out there, maybe help your neighbor who is not a textilian. But you could see that a woven structure has a certain physical property just by the structure alone. This is an interlacing structure. Another very familiar thing that is in our daily lives is a knitted structure, a knit. Your sweater is probably made out of a knit, and that is something that stretches a lot just based on the structure alone. And you could see in this illustration, in this knit itself, one reason why it physically stretches a lot is because there's a lot of fiber in a very small interlooping space. So just to give you that very basic idea of what we already know about this and what we're going to discover together as we look at this a little closer. So I think we can go to the split screen here. So here we go. We have this really beautiful veil, a face veil that Janet brought into the collection. And it is a very interesting thing. As we see it from the outside inward, it's just this beautiful applique of a rectangular object that has some embellishments on the side. Right now, the microscope is actually zoomed into the border area, which is a cross-stitching section. You could see it around the borders, all along the edges, is these stripes of just cross-stitching, most likely a silk fiber, but it's a really, really interesting multi-fiber, multi-technique object. Towards the edges, you could see just a plain weaving band, which is something also very, very typical of how to finish, finishing and edging. This is something that just wraps around the edges. And then I'm going to slide this around a little bit. I'll try to describe everything that I'm doing as I go, and just to engage you when we're looking at here. Just like I described, this is a plain woven area. This is an embroidered area next to it.
Are you going to talk about the testing that you're doing of these colors, or no? We don't have time for that.
I'm not doing testing of these colors, but mainly in the central in the central area. But I'll show you in a minute why that is. I'm just going around the border, starting around the edges, and as I move this around, the movement may be a little harsh from what you're sitting. So just look away if you need to as I zoom in and out of different sections, so you don't get dizzy while we're looking at this. But just wanted to give you, an idea of something that we spend a lot of time looking, is at this micro level looking, because this is, after all, the place where textiles really began, not only from the fiber that is chosen to create then a matrix of a technique, and then decorated and embellished. And in this specific exhibition, we're going to see a lot of embroidery, as you see in this area here. Now, I'm going to move on to the next area. That's actually more of the reason why I really wanted to bring this object out here, is that in looking at this, we come into this material here, which is a really, was actually something that was very unexpected. As something as a face veil, I certainly was expecting to see something that would be diaphanous, something see-through, something lightweight, something that could be face covering, but to be able to see, and you could see that as you could see from the image on the right, it's actually quite dark and not as sheer as you would think, and I would expect it to see something more of a woven structure here, or even a lino weave, but we have this really curious looping technique. Does everybody see that looping that I'm showing you here?
Do you want to go to your slides to look at the looping?
Yeah,
drawings?
let's look at some of the other colors first, because I think I find that also really.
This is how it always goes.
Yeah.
Can we look at this? No, I want to look at this.
I could get myself lost in looking at this.
That's why I'm trying to tell you what to do. Yeah, that is nice to see the colors. You can see the space more.
Can everybody see that well? So you have something of a mysterious fiber. This is still something that we're going to talk through together. A mysterious fiber that is looping around the previous, between every other loop of the previous layers. So in a sense, there's not a lot of movement here, because you have an interlocking technique. So this is something that's actually very stiff to feel. So something, certainly a trait unexpected of what I was expecting to see. This is a very stiff material just based on this locking technique that you see here. You also
Let's look at your slides. Devin, can we look at the slides?
Let's look at the slides. Okay, let's do it. Yeah.
Sorry.
I have the timer going here, so she's going to keep us on time. Let's go to the next one. So you can see here, there's also some beading work scattered throughout it for sparkle, for decoration. But you see this really beautiful line also that is introduced between every one of those looping structures along horizontal. So not only is there a locking aspect, but also this long laid thread. And so we're calling this a needle looping with a laid thread. So this is a very stiff material. Now, another aspect no, that's fine, that I find really interesting about this is that another aspect that makes this quite stiff in a rigid structure, contrary to what I was expecting, is in the fiber. These are micrographs taken from samples. And you can see here that I don't know what this fiber is yet, as I'm talking it through with you, but there is a scale structure. The outer layers are showing some ridges and a very textured surface. So that already is leading me towards that this is a woolly material, certainly a proteinaceous animal material. And looking at this through under cross polars, I'm able to get more detail of what's going on inside of the fiber. A fiber in its most basic form is a cylindrical structure. Certainly there's a lot of morphology and textures on the outsides that give us clues as to what it is when we look at something like this for identification. But when you shine light through it, we get more details. The chemistry inside of that, be it a crystalline structure, be it a looping structure, such as a wool, or a plant fiber, it's all going to reflect and light differently, and it's going to give us different clues under contrast, as you see here. What we see there is a medulla in the center, a cortex, which you see the material on the sides, which is and then also the scale structure on the outside. And that is very much with research and comparison led us to this example on the right, which is actually horsehair. And with all those details of looking closely, not only from the macro structure, the shape, the way that it's pieced together, the layerings, applique, the material, the use, but also down to the technique that it's made, and down to the fiber itself, are all giving us little clues about the tradition, but then specifically this one that is actually a horsehair, which is something very unexpected.
Should we go back and look at it again?
Let's look at it again now that we looked at it.
We've got a few
Just
more.
a quick slide here to see that I actually consulted the FBI animal hair identification website.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
See, there's a large database of micrographs that actually was quite an interesting surprise. But really, when we're looking at, fiber, especially like this, we really need to do comparative study, do our research, and then really do our work in material analysis. This was one aspect of doing that, certainly through a series of different micrographs that we're taking and under magnification. Looking closely at things is our number one go-to, because that's certainly a very basic step. Similarly, as we're going to do with the coin aspect, we're certainly taking other aspects of analysis, scientific analysis, to help us determine things when we have more questions that we can't answer with things of this nature. There's actually, here I'm going to stand up a little bit, 4 different colors of this. There's a yellow, a brown, a white, of that material. You could see, immediately, even just with this magnification, just by the quality of how coarse the fiber is, it has this kind of like glossy, almost, I always kind of describe it as gelatin-like texture. That's always very much indicative of an animal fiber or a woolly material. Its deeper morphology will give us more clues as to be more specific as to what we're looking at, be it a wool from a sheep, camel, from other animals, because even our own hair is very similar structure as to some of this material. Certainly different coarseness, different scale structure, but all proteinaceous. So all those little details.
Maybe would it be interesting to look back at the regular weave again after this, and then we'll wrap it up?
Sure, if you want to try it, yeah.
Am I allowed?
Oh, you go for this. Sorry, yeah.
No, we usually don't let me touch it.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I'm right here
I'm
really
just,
close.
just kidding, I do. Yeah. But I take too many pictures. I get in trouble for taking too many.
Well, there's no
because I'm like, that's cool,
There is
that's
no
cool.
regular weave structure here except for the edging.
Yeah.
I would say, because then that's just a typical plain weave.
It's nice to see, I think, to see the comparison after you've just looked
this
at
is something
them.
that we would be very much familiar with compared to what the interior structure of this is, which is really unique and interesting to just study more, understand more. Certainly these kinds of things come together in a culture. I don't come to objects like this with any cultural knowledge of specific to where this object came from, but just looking at the clues of the materials and then having these discussions with Janet is really the way to put it all together, to really help us pinpoint place, time, traditions, etc., to put a fuller narrative together with these objects. Yeah. So, I've mentioned a lot of just kind of my approaches to this and why all of this matters, why we're showing you all of this detail. Together we can learn much more about what's possible with these unique objects and that we steward in textile collections here at the Art Institute. Every detail helps us decide how to care and preserve the object, how to store it, how to display it, all of which we aim to do with the most accurate and respectful knowledge we can add to the cultural record. It's our great privilege to be able to do this work and share it with audiences in Chicago in person and in other formats globally. So I know this is a very short access to this, but it was certainly something that we were very excited to do with you, even briefly, and I hope that it helped.
So thank you. So with a little bit of pressure, we do have some time for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and a staff member will bring a microphone to you.
Question in the front here. Right over here.
Hi, excellent talk. Thank you very much, Janet and Isaac. My question is regarding the imaging and the sampling. So to do the imaging that you were just showing us, do you have to remove samples from the garment? And if so, how do you do that without disrupting the integrity of sections, like within the garment that might not have borders or edges?
Yeah, certainly to do these types of analysis, as ones that you see here in the image, the object had to be sampled. And this was not something to be taken lightly. This was certainly conversations with us, including actually even Melinda Watt, who's a department chair. These are all things that we have to take very, very carefully, and that there's a reason to do it. And certainly that there's also an ability to do it without destroying or causing harm to the object. This luckily has areas within its own construction that may have like an end of a thread that is open and accessible in many areas, where we were able to safely just cut a small sample. And the sample is quite small, especially looking at it at this length. So it's really quite like less than a millimeter of length that we're taking from this. But knowing that this is such a unique thing that we didn't know what we had before us, and we needed to learn more about what the materials was, and we needed to go through that aspect of it. But and then once this is done, that sample is certainly archived. It's something that will remain within our own archive of slides and samples in its slide format, so that it's part of our records. It's not going to disappear or be discarded in any way. So.
And something I didn't say earlier when we were talking about the headdress and about this is one of the reasons we're so excited to share this with you is we're one of the only places we know that get to do this kind of work in collaboration together. And so it's really adding a lot of knowledge to the field and to our colleagues out in other areas that can learn from this testing and can help add to the historical record.
And also, I mean, just to add briefly, this is like we said earlier, an area of the world that we don't have. You're building a collection on this area of the world, and so it's an opportunity to really learn a lot and protect these artworks, you know, and study them to a degree that has not been done before. So it's an opportunity in many ways. Mm.
We have time for about 2 more questions. I have a question up here.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I have 2 questions, actually. Where the pigments come from? And the more scientific question, could you do DNA testing on the fibers? That should be able to tell you the origin of the fibers, if it's animal origin.
Sure. There's certainly other ways that we can do testing for some of these materials. This is one accessible directly to us. And certainly we have explored with also DNA testing of this, but it is something more of a technique that we certainly have to develop more, especially with the equipment that is needed and certainly the laboratories. But this happens to be a tool that we have readily accessible in our lab. We haven't gone to the level of exploring dyes quite yet. I think that's certainly a next step to consider for this, because you could see that a lot of these things they're quite colorful, but also the pastiche of different things, this applique of the sides, the section on top, and then the horsehair. The horsehair itself is beautifully dyed in, you know, these 4 different colors. We have a black, a brown, and then the white and the red. The red's most certainly, I haven't seen a red horse,
Is there a red camel?
And there's also a beautiful yellow and orange.
The camel.
And so those are certainly dyed, and I think that's certainly a level of like maybe next exploration that can be done with this.
And it's something that I'm looking into in other textiles in the region. And as you can tell, I was just there and looking at, there's probably kind of 3 main textile techniques that are really still being studied, and we have a lot to learn about them. So there are quite a few of us that are looking into those questions about natural dyes and when did commercial dyes come in, and so it's a great question that we hope to be able to
actually,
answer.
I'm not sure if I told you, but in the coin headdress, the fiber that attaches everything together, I did sample that, and we were wondering if it was a cotton or a bast fiber, and in fact, it is a mercerized cotton.
Oh, no, you didn't tell
So
me.
I hadn't. So now I just told. Yeah.
All right.
And so that's something also to know, and this is bringing another level of. To the object itself.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have one more question over here.
Hi, y'all. Thank you for your presentation. Y'all's work is fascinating.
Thank you.
I had a question about the child's tunic from Egypt. When I was walking by, I looked and it seemed like it was like there was a faint outline immediately around it that seemed darker. Do you all, I found myself wondering if you all use like an adhesive to affix it so it doesn't move? Or I was like, does the thing excrete like oils or something? Could you share?
No, that's actually that's an interesting observation. It's none of those things. It's in fact just a tray for handling the object, but it's got a slight recess that is kind of imprinted in the covering, which is done with a Tyvek. It's just an inert material that's very like smooth and slick to not abrade the object. But we wanted a recess because it is quite fragmentary, and so we wanted something, just the slightest bit of indentation to kind of let gravity do its thing and just keep everything contained within that. And so you can't really see it from here, but I know exactly what you're talking about because there is that slight imprint of that small indentation on this tray. But it's important, I think it was important to have that indentation because of its fragmentary nature. This is an object that we actually, also with a lot of discussion with all of us in our team actually, including the curators, that the way that this object is living now as an archaeological material from a burial site, it's holding a lot of too many clues and too much information within it still, that has been embedded into the fabric, I didn't feel comfortable cleaning, arranging, redoing any of this until there's more study about what all of this is and what other things could be unearthed from the materials that are left behind, the creasing, the stain residues, the fragmentation. There's too much information there, and in fact, in the publication there is an interesting article on DNA. Experimental DNA analysis that we did on this, and why we took some of these precautions. So it also kind of brings the aspect of ethics. How much intervention do we do in an object that has to be scrutinized really amongst many of us, not just the conservator or just the curator, to make that decision, because I think we just find out more and more that the more we do with things, the more we're eliminating information. And so the curator that is actually specialized in this area, I think, has a lot more to still research before anything else can be done with it. But that's what that is. It's actually a storage handling tray that we put it in.
Do we have time for one more question? Down here. Oh, yeah, right there.
Thanks. I found that looping technique really incredible, and I'm wondering, you haven't really talked about how these are produced. Are these woven on looms? Are these all needlework pieces? And do you think there's any possible metaphoric content in structure in this piece?
Well, we've had this conversation. I'm sorry that we didn't emphasize it more, but I think I described how this locking technique, this looping, is actually a physical locking. That's why I walked you through those aspects of those physical aspects of weaving and knitting and what those things do. This is a locking technique, so it's a very, very rigid structure that I find kind of like a shield.
Yeah.
And so,
No, we've talked about how it's one of your favorite things, right? That you said it several times. It's really,
yeah.
it holds a lot of structure, but it's also quite diaphanous.
Yeah,
And-
it is quite diaphanous, yeah.
And it has to have been done by hand, right?
Well, it's most certainly done by hand, and especially with the length of the horsehair, you can kind of follow it, and you have ends that actually stick up. This is one area why we were able to sample this, because you have ends of horsehair sticking out everywhere, really. It most certainly must include a needle technique, because to create that loop and rewrapping around the previous line of thread, you need to guide that through. I don't know of a mechanism that could do that alone. I think it could be very much just a needle technique, even including that inlay thread. This technique does happen to exist in other cultures, the exact same looping with the inlaid thread of no relation. I think it's just what humans do with thread and a needle is, we came up with the same thing in two different parts of the world at different times. So I find that also quite fascinating.
But maybe you know more and we can talk about
are you
it.
hinting at us that
Can you spin horsehair?
Can I?
Can you
Can horsehair
spin?
be spun?
I don't know.
I don't know. This had a ply of 3 or 4 strands per thread, and I can imagine that certainly holds itself to some extent. But I also see this as being very slippery. You can maybe imagine like the strings on your violin or your bow, that being horsehair, how slippery they are between each other. So I can imagine this being actually quite difficult to spin to very long lengths, and that's why in this one particularly, you have these running like segments, I think is what maybe we can call it, segments of it done in small lengths. And the horsehair could probably be the right length of an arm to like control, then at another one, leave those nice ends out so that conservators of the future can sample them. And then, but I think that was one reason why it was also limited to just like the 3 or 4 strands, excuse me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Janet and Isaac.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We could take these off now.